Hello, welcome to Revit Talk with Justin Benjamin. Today we'll be talking about Autodesk impressions. I'm going to walk you through the very basics from the interface, to bringing in a file, even exporting a file from Revit to CAD, best method there, and bringing that again into impressions and starting to color it, starting to work with the styles and some of the tools that impressions has. This is not the advanced course yet, and I will produce a video soon after that, in my opinion, are some advanced techniques. But that said, let's go ahead and just again work with the basics. This is your Autodesk Impressions interface. We have actually very few main parts to this interface. That is the menu bar, similar to most softwares, a toolbar, a layer manager. This is the global stroke icon. This will allow you to stroke whatever image you bring in, the line work that is, be it with a massive wiggle, a heavy dark charcoal feel, blue marker stroke. These are just, again, it's going to apply this style to your entire drawing. It's a quick, easy way to get a sketchy-like product when the client's right outside the door and you just don't want to give them a Revit or CAD hardline drawing. It's a tool that I very rarely use because I do like to manipulate each layer right from the get-go, but again, it is a tool that's there. This right here is the backbone, as far as I'm concerned, to impressions. The layers toolbar, you're going to find that this is going to hold all the CAD line work. This right here are all the styles. This is essentially a style is applied to a layer. A layer would be a CAD layer, so a door would be a layer, and this style can be applied to that layer. One style can be applied to multiple layers, so the doors and the windows can share a style. In this case, that style consists of just a black line. But instead of that, we could also have a medium pencil style. We can have a fill, this yellow fill. We can also jump through our library, which is located again down here. There are all sorts of other types of style libraries provided right from impressions. I will say that like most things, everything right out of the box isn't perfect. Customizing will inevitably prove necessary. To give you an idea of what these styles are made up of, you'll find that I've selected the CP True Blue style. You'll see that style is not just one line, but rather there are these stroked fills you'll find. And some styles can get very, very complicated as we move forward. We'll talk about that. There's a style library, though. Peruse this to see if there's in fact a style that at least kind of gets you going, doesn't already exist out there. You bring these libraries in by merely selecting them, saying OK, and sure enough, there you have it. Anyway, so this is your style library. Down here, some quick, fast controls. Fast display helps with your graphics card. You'll probably toggle off that from time to time. Auto Snap, I think this is a great tool, something that Photoshop doesn't really provide very easily anyway. Scale styles, we'll talk about that. And this auto layering tool, which I don't use, we'll talk about that. And then this is, of course, your status bar. I think no better way to really walk you through the tools up here as well as the layers than actually to bring in a file. Again, I will walk you through the steps to even get this file to where I've already brought it, but just for the sake of this training, we're going to go ahead and import a CAD file, and I'm going to go ahead and just run through these options really quickly right now, and I'll explain all those tools later on. Alright, so I've been brought in a CAD file. You'll notice right over here in our layer properties bar, that we have quite a few more layers happening. The way that Impressions categorizes everything is there's first a sketch. Under that sketch is a layer. So this is your sketch, layout 1. Your layer is ANO plot, and the style assigned to it is 207. Alright, that said, let's find out what our sketches are. Great little tool of impressions. If you click the arrow to the left of the sketch, you'll select all that's encompassed within it. You'll see this is the title block. I'm going to go ahead and right click and delete that layer. Don't really need it for this rendering exercise. Doing it again, I can see that this is my plan right, we're going to call this. And doing this again, you'll see this is our plan left. Take a moment to notice that these sketches have scales assigned to them. This is very important. This is a one-to-one interface here in Impressions. You do always want to bring in the sheets of a file, be it the CAD file, the Revit file. We do not want to bring in the model space. But that said, let's go ahead and modify this environment to reflect that of a 1/4" scale environment. So under the File menu bar, Document Setup. Right from the get-go, I'm going to canvas size. I'm going to go with D here, or B that is. I'm going to go with a 1/4" scale. Say OK. Having done that, let's go ahead and moving forward, let's go ahead and take a look at the plan left for a moment. I click on it, expanding it. I see all the layers that make up it. If I go and click on the arrow to the left of each layer, you'll see that Impressions will isolate it, or at least identify with it. You'll see next to that layer that style that we talked about. Now by default, each layer gets its own style when first brought into Impressions. This is something that I don't typically maintain for very long. Meaning, what I like to first do is make it so I can see everything very clearly. So I mentioned earlier that these are the sketches that were brought in from the CAD file. In Impressions, they always start you off with a blank and empty sketch. So let's go ahead and rename this sketch to be fills. Yeah. And then I'm going to rename this layer that, again, is assigned to nothing right now, and call it working. Alright, the style 1 that came with Impressions. I'm going to go ahead and come down here. I could come up here and do the same thing. And rename it to be, rather, working. Okay. Now, having done that, if I go ahead and select all that is in both these sketches and right-click, I want to assign the selection to this working layer that I've created. Or rather, yes, assign the selection to the working layer. Now that said, if I go and click away, you'll see that something's then turned black. You'd think by assigning everything to a black style that everything would turn black, and the reason for that is that there are these blocks. Now there are some cool things that you can see via the tutorials when you first launch Impressions, but I don't very much like blocks. I find that the dynamic paint tool works very well without blocks, and you'll see how I use that. But that said, let's go ahead and make it so that, again, I have control over everything by right-clicking and exporting the block. Alright, go ahead and click those same sketches again, right-click. You'll see that I have to do it again. It appears that there was a block within a block. And one last time. Oh, all is fine this time. Let's go ahead and assign this now again to that working. Alright, everything's black. I like that. Now, having assigned everything to one style that means something to me, all those empty styles that were the style 1s, 2s, and 3s, they mean nothing to me, and they're just going to confuse me as I move forward. So I'd recommend that we go and purge those out as soon as you can. So purge and use styles. Now you'll find that if I wanted to assign this again, sketch this another layer, you'll find there's only 2 styles active, that are 216 and a working. I'll find out what 216 is later. Alright, now let's go ahead and also take a moment here and realize that I think our sheet size is a bit small, because those plans definitely want a bit larger than I anticipated. Going back to File, Document Setup, go ahead and change that to a D. Okay. And we'll go ahead and move everything over to center on the piece of paper. Alright, the way I like to work is I don't like to fill or even touch or mess with the layers that currently are, and that I don't like to assign another style on top, start painting while this layer is active is what I mean to say. Really, basically, whatever layer is selected is essentially whatever tool you start doing, whether it be drawing a box, whether it be filling anything, everything's being now assigned to this working layer. That said, and again, I don't like to assign anything to the actual line work that came from CAD or Impressions, because later on you'll find that we can actually update CAD geometry, and messing with those lines may hurt us. That says I'm going to go ahead and create a few new layers right here. Each layer is going to be a different type of fill I'd like to have, so I'm going to do a chair fill. Okay. Go ahead and now I'm going to do a layer for my countertop, the desktop that is. Let's just keep it there for right now. Okay. Right now you'll see that as I create new layers, a new layer is assigned copying that of its original, the style it is. So now I'm just going to click on the style here and call this, right now, just chair fill. Again, a bit redundant, but it makes this easy for right now. Desktop fill. Now that said, let's talk really now about these styles. As right now, if I were to try to fill any chair with the current style assigned, that's just the paint bucket up here, I hover over a space, you'll find that it appears as though nothing's happening. But what's really happening is that this fill right now is just made up of a stroke, a boundary really. So you're just painting the boundary that is already there with the stroke here. So again, we want this to be a fill, not a stroke. That said, is that you should know that really fills are made up of very few elements actually. A stroke, which is what we just talked about, it's a line. A fill, which is actually like the paint bucket, actually fills a color red, or a style that is watercolor. Stroked fill, it starts getting like a kind of a sketchy hatch, be it. Hatched fill, this is nothing but concrete, brick, things like that. A new outline stroke, this is just going to make that single line that was once a stroke, make it a double line. This is something I barely ever use. And then finally an effect. An effect is a combination of either a drop shadow or a roughen. Each one is manipulatable as far as how intense the wiggle is and things like that. But that said, is that you can have as many of these effects applied to any given style. That said, let's go ahead and change this stroke to be an actual fill. So I'm going to remove this. Now this chair fill style has nothing to paint with. So now I'm going to actually add a fill. What kind of fill do I want? A gradient, texture. I'm just going to go with uniform for right now. Give it a blue for right now. So now this chair has a blue fill. I'm going to come up here to the desktop, and let's actually come over here to our library. Mix styles, and let's just for the desktop drag. All you have to do is drag now this style on top of the layer, and sure enough, the desktop will take on that style. Okay, now we're ready to move forward. All right, so let's talk about these tools up here. All right. This is just your move tool, object selection tool, it's your default. Moving down here, play with the layers. I'm going to really just again focus on the tools that I use most. The line tool to help kind of finish spaces if necessary. If I draw lines right now, naturally, I'm going to get that fill in there. But if I go back to the working layer, the line will only look like that. All right, let's go ahead and delete those though. All right, boxes the same as lines. But here's the weight of impressions. Your paint bucket and your dynamic paint bucket. All right, dropping down just out of the regular paint bucket, you have just your regular fill that is like in Photoshop, your line fill, your window fill, and your freehand fill. We're going to talk about each one of those. Your regular fill, which is your shortcut H. So now as I hover over spaces and close boundaries, I can now fill these boundaries. Currently on the working line, so I'm going to move myself up to the desktop. Hover over the space, and sure enough, I can now fill. It's imperative that you guys realize that it's not important what the fill looks like immediately. We can change it later, it's very easy, but rather just getting everything filled up with this color. Now, this isn't nice right here. This is very sloppy at this point, because now my stroke that borders this fill is like creating this wiggle, and now I'm not having a smooth surface. Well, let's see what we can do about that. I'll go ahead and delete everything I've done at this point, again using just the regular H fill. But now I'm going to go ahead and find out what layer this is. If I expand the plan left and just select one line, coming down in the browser I can see that that line is assigned to 4 case. Let's turn that off. Alright, that makes things a lot easier. So come back up here again, if I come back to my desktop fill, I can use my H fill and go through and fill as I just did. Alright, now we're talking. Alright, we've exhausted that of the H tool, the typical regular fill tool. Let's find out what these other tools are. Coming down here, there's the line tool. Let's go ahead and select that. Alright, but now I'm going to select the chair layer. Zoom in on the chair. Now before, I'd only be able to fill in one spot at a time. But with this line tool, I can now click on spaces. Oop, didn't mean to do that. I can click, I can start a line, and honestly, until I stop the line by right-clicking, it's going to find all the closed boundaries. Now, you're going to find when I do my finale, that's how I'm going to color all these walls and panels. This line tool is great. That said, let's go ahead and delete that and talk about another fill. There's the window fill, which, as you may imagine, the window fill tool simply select like you would in CAD, or rather box out what you like, and it will fill that entirety. Now, if you think about it, with our ability to isolate layers and things like that, you undo this. If I were to come up and select this line, that is the chair. Again, now select all that, isolate that layer. Now I'll come down to my chair fill, chair layer that is. Come over and then window out all my chairs, and I went and turned that layer up as well. Sure enough, I just filled all the chairs right there on the fly. That said, if we go ahead and come up here and say to this sketch not to be hidden anymore, either come on back. Do the same thing for the desks by zooming in, again, selecting one layer that makes up the desk. Find that's the equipment layer, great. Isolate that. Now you're going to find that we don't have the binding panels. So we're about to come over here and start playing with get the walls maybe, and then throw back on the, see what that does, and get the, now I'm just trying to find binding elements out of those panels really. And I can't seem to find them, so what to do but turn off the sketch entirely, bring it all back, select a panel, find out that was the furniture entirely, okay, and then so was the desk, right? Okay, equipment we want, and the furniture. So we'll go ahead and do this again, isolate layer, and the furniture. Excellent. Now, if we did the window though, unfortunately, we would be filling up those panels. So maybe that wasn't the best case scenario, but then again, we could window upwards. Oop, again, turn that layer on. So this might save us some time. All in all, that's the window tool. Now, there is finally the Freehand Jade tool, which is much like the line tool, but you can just be free-handed and go crazy that way. Get the idea. Now, if we do have a time where the line doesn't quite touch the next line, so the boundary's a little open, and we don't want to draw a line to take the time, you can always play with the tolerances, moving them up or down, making it so that, in fact, that boundary may be closed temporarily so you can fill it. All right, and then your precision, I always keep mine at 11, the highest it gets. All right, I showed you guys the basic fill tool only now to wow you, hopefully, without the dynamic fill tool. And why is the dynamic fill tool amazing? Well, let me tell you. Excuse me. Let's go ahead and start fresh by deleting all that we painted thus far. And starting with a chair fill, come over to the dynamic paint tool and click it. Now the dynamic fill tool looks at common layers, layer boundaries, as well as, or rather, the layer boundaries. Now, so that says if I go ahead and select here, it's finding all similar boundaries. And in doing so, I'm not having to worry about isolating anything. Rather, I just painted all the chairs in a couple of seconds. I do the same thing with the desktop. Now again, we're going to have that error with the pedestals here, but we just have to turn those off, and sure enough, we'd fill and we would get that wiggle. But you certainly get the idea that now all of a sudden we are able to fill quite quickly, and this goes for, of course, each layer, each fill, etc., etc. Starting to get the idea there. Now, before I move on and actually start with a real project, I want to talk one more second about manipulating these already existing layers. I said earlier that it wasn't necessary to really care what the fill was right from the get-go, because you could spend hours just trying to find out that right perfect fill for a material that maybe you ultimately value engineer out. So that said, is getting any fill on each layer and then worrying about that, again, that color, that texture at the end is really the best policy. And that said, is now that we've filled all the chairs, I can come over to this fill, and again, I can remove the already existing fill, or rather I can click on this expand, so now I see all the properties of a style, which I'm not going to go into in this tutorial. You can play with a little bit on your own, but for the most part we're just going to kind of stick to some basics. That said, I can go ahead and bring in a texture. A texture is actually looking for an image. So now I'm just changing this chair to, let's see here, I already have some materials pre-done. Nothing for chairs, but let's go ahead and let's give the twist graphite, this carpet finish to the chair. We've done that, sure enough, all the chairs grab onto that style. Alright. Now we can also go ahead and now add a really cool effect, be it maybe a shadow to this fill. Give it a little pop. Now again, let's go ahead and see the properties of that shadow. Make a cast. We can give it a distance of 2 instead of 5, so rather 3 maybe. And again, playing a little bit here or there to kind of get the effect really that you want. Alright, so what I like to do is give the chair a small shadow, and then give the walls, the partitions a bigger shadow, and then the walls even bigger ones. So this way you get that idea of 3D very quickly, very easily. Alright, you can always turn off the shadow on the fly. You can turn off parts of a style as you move forward as well. The last part of manipulating these styles, at least for this lesson, is the line work. Alright, now that said, is we have all these hard lines still, and I told you earlier I don't like doing the global stroke, which would essentially make all these lines one cool maybe looking style. Instead of doing that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and take just find out what the walls are on. Alright, a wall. Excellent. So let's come over here to find a pencil style. It looks good to us. Pencil stroke, we'll go with maybe a 9B pencil stroke or 8B. I can just drag right onto the layer, here in the properties palette, and sure enough, nice little style there. Alright, now maybe the 9B. And maybe I want that 9B, you know what, I want a wiggle to it as well. So let's add an effect to that 9B style, give it a bit of a wiggle. That's a bit much of a wiggle, so let's go into the properties and play with them a little bit to see if we can make it look a little more attractive. Alright. And so now I can go ahead and find the doors and assign styles to the doors, or rather, if I don't want to take the time, rather I just want to come over here and select a soft pencil and maybe assign to the whole sketch. So everything has a soft pencil, or rather let's go to the style library again and go to the pencils. Let's get a reference set. Bring them in here. Let's go ahead with a wiggle pen. Ooh, that's a bit much. 3, 1, and sure enough, there's a wiggle. Again, we can play with this. We can play with fills, dropping the shadows. That certainly gives you an idea of the layer palette here, the styles manager here, and the styles library. That said, it's definitely healthy to pack the layers whenever you get a chance. Packing layers just bundles them all up, makes the file a little smaller. File size is going to be huge. You don't want to get kicked out. Do realize that I did have an error this entire time. I didn't mention earlier, but my fills sketch is assigned to 1/8 inch. That said is that these styles that we're playing with all are looking at this scale. So if I actually change this 1/8 inch to the 1/4 that it should be, well, one, everything's going to get really big. That is what was under that sketch, which now I have to play with scales to bring it back. But this is how that style wanted to be. You can see it's actually not so much of a wiggle at the boundaries like we once thought. So again, you want to make sure these sketch layers are appropriate. Now, before actually my final step here moving forward is that do realize that you can go ahead and create a company standard that is a sketch of fills, creating every layer they may or may not need, pre-assigning it a color they may care about or not. And that's it. If you create all the fills that you think your company may need, try to anticipate everything. Of course, somebody may or may not need to create a new layer, be it, or even a group. By the way, I didn't mention them earlier, but you can create a group, and a group would consist of a handful of layers. So you could actually call one group walls, wall finishes, and then under that group you could create a handful of layers and call it finish 1, finish 2, and have those styles. And this way, if this properties palette does get a little heavy, you can minimize the groups, and so if you're looking for one specific layer, expand the group that makes the most sense. Anyway, that said is that you can go ahead and create this template, be it, and this way when somebody wants to start a new project, all you have to do is click open as a template, and save changes no. In my firm's case, this is our template right here. So it's on the L drive, and resources, impressions, customization, templates. I select this and say OK. What it does is essentially copies all that's within this template, which is just one sketch full of groups of layers, etc. And it gives somebody a starting point really to move forward. Alright, so as you can see here, I've gone ahead and created entourage layers. I'll minimize my impression layers for a moment here. Background, foreground for entourage. This is much like Photoshop. You need things in the foreground. Sketches that are in front of other sketches will be on top of that line work, etc. I have a working print line and a working delete line. This way, if I do need a line that didn't come in from the CAD file, I can draw it via this layer. And if I just need a temporary line to draw, I'll draw it via this layer. And then in the long run, I'll just go ahead and delete this layer and all the lines that are associated with it. Create groups of scope of work. Again, these are things that my firm would utilize. Different types of departments. This way, if I did want to identify offices, circulations via this software, I could. Have walls, styles, things like that. Options for paint, doors and windows. And again, this is an extreme. I would hope my users would go through and quickly delete groups that don't pertain to them, so they don't have to worry about all these crazy layers when they're only looking for one or two. Floor option 1 or 2. The great thing here, and you're going to see this in my sample moving forward, is that I'm going to go ahead and fill all the floor materials for a design using this group here, using materials 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. When I'm done, and assuming the client needs another set of materials because he wasn't happy with the first set, you can actually duplicate this layer. And when you do that, you're going to go and get a whole other group, but you're also copying essentially and pasting on top of the previous group all the same fills, materials, etc. So now I can go ahead and this being, go ahead and double click this and say this is option 2 now. Double click this and say this is option 1. I could theoretically had, we use fills, turn off option 1, with option 2 on, then go through the layers and then assign the new material that is desired, that we want to give it a shot. And now this would a shot for that of the owner. So when you drag this onto that material, sure enough, your plan will update and change accordingly. It's a very good tool. All right. Now, beware that as we do move forward, I will be doing kind of just a run through me on the fly coloring and using all the tools we spoke of. I'll narrate what I'm doing, but I will be moving slightly fast, and that I just want to show you how fast things can get done within impressions and get a kind of cool image very quickly and very forwardly. I actually mentioned before I would do that full animation, I was going to show you the best method to bring a view or set of views into impressions via Revit, assuming you're not just directly in CAD. That said, I'm going to open up my project. You'll find that I've already have my views that I like to color, render, already on sheets. All right, my perspectives. You'll find I'm rendering on this sheet and the plans on that sheet. It's very important you export the sheets and not the actual model, views themselves. Remember that scale concept, the fact that you are working in impressions on a sheet size that is 11 by 17 or 8.5 by 11. You can't have a one-to-one environment. Rather, you have to have these at certain scales. Okay. So that said, click on the big R, going export, CAD, DWG. Alright, very familiar interface will pop up. Go ahead and get so I see the sheets in the model. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring in my plans option 1, my perspective option 1. I also like to go to the DWG tab here and check the box that says export rooms and areas as polylines. This might help us when we do some fills later on. With that done, I'm going to go and click next. Alright. Go ahead and browse to where I like to drop this. I do have a folder structure that I recommend for the group here at DBI. The folder structure is located under the LBIM Resources, Impressions, Customization, Folder Structure. And you'll see this Impressions copy file. If you copy it and delete the copy me into the project number folder that you're working in, you'll have now all the folders that I would recommend be a part of your project. All right. I'm not going to touch upon it via this lesson, but do realize you can give up essentially in impressions and do a save as a Photoshop file extension, and all the layers will go into the Photoshop, and you can play in there and get your end result there as well. All right. Now that said, it's come back here. Let's export now into DWG format. I've already done this here, but go and do it again. I bring it back to 2004. I don't know why I do it. You don't have to. I uncheck the XF boxes, views on sheets, and I'm going to go short, and I'm going to say OK. In this case, I will be replacing mine. I haven't exported those views. Come back now, File, Import. Browse that same location. We'll do bring in the perspective for this particular instance. Say OK. Now, before that pop-up we saw earlier, I'm going to do layout versus viewport. Viewport, I can actually specify which of the 3 views that are on the sheet do I want to bring in. I'll bring them all in for right now. Model space is something I don't do. And forward, I don't care about the CTV file because I do end up playing with each line in impressions, so how it comes in I don't care. This is that global stroke icon here. I like to have that individual control right there actually in the interface. And to keep this, this is all good stuff. 3D import options, I go in there, remove hidden lines. It's a good idea, make so there's not lines on top of lines. Mapping options. I'm going to go ahead and, since I don't really deal with the blocks, as you saw earlier, I explode them. I'm going to go ahead and ignore that as well. Moving forward, leaving all these checked. You can look into them if you don't feel as though you want to check them all, but I like to keep a clean file, so I go ahead and check everything. And finally say finish. And there you have it. This is very similar to the plans that we brought in earlier, and I would do all the steps that I did earlier to prep the file regarding selecting all the sketches, seeing which ones I want, deleting the ones I don't want, renaming the ones I do want. Perspective scale really isn't a big thing we can worry about, though I'd like to, because the perspective is an ongoing change in scale. That said, is that Impressions sometimes likes to shut down with some perspectives, as it does typically handle the 2-dimensional environment and can handle a 3-dimensional one, but I feel like the scale is really, the fact that it doesn't have scale is hurting it. But again, exploding the sketches, things like that, and then filling.